They taint on a part that became priceless. It began with something so ordinary that no one thought twice about it. A small curved mirror, roughly the size of a man's hand, mounted just above the windscreen of a Supermarine Spitfire. It cost around 1 or 2 pounds in 1940, about $18 when converted today, a price that could barely buy lunch in wartime London. And yet, that mirror would save hundreds of men who were too young to imagine death, but old enough to fly toward it every dawn. When sunlight struck the polished glass, it flashed like a blink of warning. Pilots learned to trust that glint. Behind them, a Messerschmitt Bf-109 could be diving at 400 miles an hour, its machine guns already aimed. A single glance upward meant the difference between a roll and escape, or a spiral of fire falling into the channel. One of them, Flight Lieutenant John Freeborn, later wrote in his diary, "I saw the devil in the mirror and pulled before he saw me." It was not poetry. It was survival compressed into half a second. In 1940, Britain stood on the edge of invasion. The Battle of Britain was not fought with numbers. It was fought with seconds. And those seconds were won by a sliver of glass that turned fear into foresight. When engineers first proposed adding mirrors to fighters, many commanders laughed. Mirrors were for cars, not for war. But war itself has no patience for pride. Reports began to pile up. Pilots shot from behind, unaware. Others complained that twisting to check their six cost them vital altitude and time. The Royal Air Force listened, and a cheap civilian part suddenly became a weapon of awareness. At the Imperial War Museum, one can still find photographs showing the earliest Spitfires with bare canopies. Clean, perfect, and blind. Later models show the unmistakable hump of a mirror, angled just right to reflect the sky behind. It was installed not by decree from above, but by desperation from below. Pilots demanding one more chance to live. And that is where history hides its miracles, not in secret weapons, but in small, stubborn corrections. The mirror's importance spread by word of mouth. Ground crews would borrow mirrors from civilian vehicles, polish them with ration cloth, and bolt them onto the cockpit frame. The first few were crude. Some vibrated loose under flight stress, others cracked under hail or gunfire. But when they worked, they gave a man back his future. The price remained the same, 1 or 2 pounds. But every reflection held a human life. An ordinary part, yes, but no longer a trivial one. In a world burning with technology and terror, it proved that sometimes salvation costs less than a meal, weighs less than a pound, and shines brighter than any metal. If you value stories like this, don't forget to like and subscribe. It helps preserve forgotten chapters of history. And tell us where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. When the first Spitfires rolled out of the Supermarine factory in 1938, their canopies were sleek, seamless, and utterly blind to the rear. No mirror, no reflection, just forward momentum and faith. Pilots complained early, not because they feared cowardice, but because they knew what the unseen sky could hold. The Luftwaffe's Messerschmitts often attacked from the sun, diving unseen until it was too late. And yet, official reports listed rear visibility as a secondary concern, and it took death to make command listen. By June 1940, losses began to mount. Pilots who never saw their attackers vanished in flames over Kent and Sussex. At RAF Duxford, engineers gathered damaged aircraft, marking bullet holes that entered from behind. A pattern emerged. Most fatal hits came from the rear quarter, the blind 6 o'clock. Squadron leader Alan Deere wrote after one mission, "You never fear what you cannot see until it's behind you." That single sentence, copied in technical memos and letters home, carried more weight than any official report. The solution came not from military doctrine, but from improvisation. Ground crews at Biggin Hill began bolting small automobile mirrors, the same kind fitted to Morris 8s, onto Spitfire canopies. It looked almost comical, this fragile oval of glass perched on the machine that defended Britain. But by July, pilots noticed the difference. "Feels like having eyes in the back of your head," one mechanic quoted a returning pilot saying. By late August 1940, the Air Ministry quietly issued a directive: all operational Spitfires and Hurricanes to be fitted with rear-view mirrors where possible. It was not yet a factory standard, merely a field recommendation. But inside hangars and makeshift workshops, the rule spread faster than bureaucracy could write it. At the Imperial War Museum, a surviving blueprint shows the annotation in pencil: mirror 5-inch convex, optional. Optional, yet essential. Every added mirror meant another flight home, another telegram not sent, and that quiet evolution defined the Battle of Britain more than any new engine or gun. It was not about faster machines, but about learning where danger truly came from. No official counted how many pilots survived because of that change, but stories rippled through the mess halls. A young flyer spotting a diving 109 just in time, another catching a flash of silver and rolling away from death. They laughed about it, called it the poor man's radar. In those moments of gallows humor, the RAF rediscovered something simple. Survival often begins not with invention, but with attention. What the enemy never knew was how humility shaped this adaptation. Britain learned to look back, literally, and that act of looking saved its future. Over the Channel, in the summer of 1940, every second of air combat was an argument between life and gravity. A Spitfire could climb faster, turn tighter, and outroll a Messerschmitt Bf 109. But the man inside it could only see forward, until the mirror changed everything. Imagine a pilot like Sergeant Peter Carter of No. 6 and 10 Squadron, 23 years old, engine oil streaking his goggles, heartbeat synchronized with the roar of the Rolls-Royce Merlin. Below him, the sea glitters deceptively calm, while above, unseen, the enemy circles. He glances at the small convex mirror bolted above the cockpit frame, just a flick of the eyes, and spots a dark cross closing fast from behind. That half second of reflection becomes half a mile of advantage. He dives, the tracer lines sweep past empty air, and the hunter becomes the hunted. Dozens of letters from RAF pilots mention those moments. One reads simply, "I saw my death before it saw me." Another, written after a night sortie, notes that the mirror caught a blink of moonlight on his wings, and that was enough. These were not poetic exaggerations. They were the vocabulary of men who learned to measure existence in milliseconds. Technically, the mirror altered the geometry of dogfighting. Before its adoption, an attacking German could sit directly behind a Spitfire at 200 yards, invisible. With the mirror, that same position became a liability. A pilot could see, brake, and loop. A simple 30-degree bank could turn a potential kill into a stalemate, or even a counterattack. Statistically, combat analyses from RAF Fighter Command showed a 12% reduction in surprise rear attacks after mirrors became common. 12%, a number that, in human terms, meant fathers returning home, fiancés receiving letters instead of condolence visits. Engineers noticed new habits forming. Pilots began checking mirrors instinctively before every climb, every turn. Some even scribbled notes on the frame. "Look back, live long." One mechanic at Biggin Hill joked that he could tell a rookie from a veteran by how often he caught the man glancing upward before takeoff. The mirror had changed not just tactics, but temperament. It taught caution without cowardice. Dogfights were no longer mere contests of speed and guns. They became mirrors of human adaptability. Each reflection told a story of evolution, from panic to discipline, from blindness to awareness. In later years, when journalists asked veterans what made the Spitfire legendary, few spoke about horsepower or cannons. They spoke about visibility, about how, on a clear day, the mirror caught not just enemies, but also the faces of comrades passing by in tight formation, fleeting ghosts reflected for a heartbeat, then gone. A weapon of glass, fragile yet faithful, gave those men the most valuable gift a soldier could ask for, the chance to see one more dawn. The story of the Spitfire's rearview mirror did not begin in a laboratory or a ministry meeting. It began, as many revolutions do, in a dusty corner of a workshop. In early 1939, a mechanic named Arthur Henshaw at RAF Hornchurch rummaged through a pile of scrap car parts looking for a bolt. Instead, he found a small mirror assembly from a wrecked Austin 7. He cleaned it, tightened the swivel joint, and jokingly attached it to a Spitfire canopy. When the pilot returned from patrol, he said, "Keep it there. I saw Jerry before Jerry saw me." Word spread through the squadrons faster than official memos ever could. The improvisation became contagious. Mechanics began salvaging mirrors from civilian scrapyards, polishing them under blackout lights, and fitting them to fighters. Each was slightly different. Some round, others rectangular, some fixed with bits of wire or even chewing gum. Photographs from the Imperial War Museum show early Spitfire Mach 1 cockpits with crude hand-fitted mirrors. None were identical, but all worked. Engineers at the Supermarine factory noticed the trend and began drafting specifications for what they called Mirror Rear View Type 300. By mid-1940, that once random accessory entered production lines as a standard fit-up. It took only 12 minutes to install, cost around $1.12, and added less than half a pound of weight. Yet the psychological lift it gave pilots was immeasurable. Many wrote home about it not as equipment, but as a companion. One letter from Flight Sergeant Leonard King described it simply, "She's the only one who watches my back." At the Castle Bromwich factory, where women worked 12-hour shifts assembling Spitfires, a mirror became part of every final inspection checklist. Workers would polish it gently with soft flannel, making sure there were no smudges before signing off the airframe. One fitter, Margaret Evans, recalled decades later, "We knew the lads looked into that mirror before every fight, so we wanted it perfect. And a detail so small became a matter of pride, almost a ritual, reflection as both protection and prayer." The mirror's evolution also reflected Britain's resourcefulness. During those years, the nation was rationing everything from sugar to steel. Aircraft production depended on improvisation, repurposing, and relentless adaptation. A part meant for a car's side door became a pilot's lifeline. What began as a joke among mechanics turned into a piece of standard equipment recognized by the Air Ministry. By the end of 1941, more than 3,000 Spitfires left the production line equipped with mirrors. They shone under the same sun that burned over Dunkirk and El Alamein. Each one was a reminder that victory was not always engineered in design rooms. Sometimes it was improvised in silence, born from the hands of those who refused to accept blindness as fate. Every time a Spitfire took off, that small piece of glass caught the dawn before the pilot did. And that reflection, humble and fleeting, was the light of survival. No historian can count precisely how many lives that mirror saved, but the silence of what did not happen tells its own truth. Every time a Spitfire pilot spotted a flash of danger behind him and turned away in time, another family did not receive a telegram stamped "regret to inform." The mirror became an invisible veteran, credited nowhere yet present in every dogfight. Survivors spoke about it with reverence. Squadron leader Jeffrey Wellham, who flew in 1940, once reflected that the mirror taught us to think behind as much as ahead. Others joked that it gave them a sixth sense, but behind those words lay something deeper: the human need to feel that someone or something was watching over you. For pilots alone in the clouds, the mirror became that guardian. It was said that during long patrols over the channel, some pilots glanced up not just for enemies, but to glimpse their own faces. A brief, distorted reflection to remind themselves they were still there. That image, trembling in vibration and sunlight, carried them through the worst moments of fatigue and fear. One letter from a young flyer to his sister described it perfectly. When you see yourself in that little mirror, you remember home, you remember you exist. Psychologists later noted that situational awareness, not firepower, determined survival in over 60% of dogfights during the Battle of Britain. The mirror wasn't a weapon. It was consciousness made visible. The enemy could be faster or higher, but the pilot who saw first lived longer. Out of the roughly 2,900 RAF fighter pilots who fought in 1940, around 200 survived the entire campaign. Many of them attributed their survival not to luck, but to vigilance, a habit born from a small circle of glass. In the workshops, engineers started engraving faint markings along the edge, Type 300 approved. It became a badge of quiet honor among maintenance crews. They knew their work rarely earned glory, yet every reflection that saved a pilot's life was their victory too. The mirror connected the ground and the sky, the unknown maker and the living user, a fragile thread of glass linking those who built with those who fought. Think about this for a moment. In an age of supercharged engines and cutting-edge weaponry, the most human act of war was a man looking over his shoulder, not to kill, but to survive. What does that tell us about the nature of courage? Is it the roar of guns, or the humility to keep watching even when the sky seems empty? Every mirror told the same story again and again: a quick glance, a sudden roll, a narrow escape. Hundreds of such glances stitched together the defense of a nation. And perhaps that's why, even now, no price tag seems high enough for that small, curved piece of glass that once gave Britain its future. In 1943, long after the Battle of Britain had turned the tide, a curious conversation was overheard in an unlikely place: a prisoner of war camp at Trent Park, north of London. Hidden microphones recorded captured Luftwaffe pilots reminiscing about combat. Among the chatter and cigarette smoke, one German ace admitted something few would say aloud. Those English mirrors, they had eyes behind them. His comrades laughed uneasily, but the tone was admiration, not mockery. The mirror had become a symbol of an entire nation's alertness. What fascinated German officers was not the device itself, they could easily copy it, but the mentality behind it. British pilots, they said, seemed to fly with caution rather than arrogance. They did not rely solely on machines or orders, but on self-awareness. That humility was something the Reich's culture of heroism rarely taught. And so, within weeks, German engineers quietly installed similar mirrors on the new Bf 109G models. War, for all its propaganda, remains the fastest teacher of pragmatism. At the Imperial War Museum today, a logbook from a downed Spitfire notes, "Rearview mirror shattered by debris, pilot bailed out safely." The irony was that even broken, the mirror had already done its job. It had given the warning. Its effectiveness was never in perfection, but in presence. Soldiers who recovered wrecked aircraft often kept fragments of the mirror as talismans, believing they held the last image a pilot ever saw. The mirror also taught engineers a moral paradox: how a simple act of seeing could humanize war. Reports from interrogation centers mention that captured Luftwaffe flyers sometimes asked to inspect the cockpit of the planes that shot them down. They stared at the mirror and whispered, "It's so small." One RAF technician watching from a distance later wrote, "In that moment, the enemy saw himself, not in defeat, but in reflection." As the war progressed, innovations grew more complex: radar, gyroscopic gun sights, oxygen masks. Yet nothing matched the psychological comfort of that small reflective eye. In pilot briefings, instructors even used it as metaphor. "Keep your mirror clean, keep your mind clear." The line spread like folklore among squadrons from Malta to Burma. Pause here and imagine two men in rival machines chasing each other through clouds, each depending on the same humble mirror. What do you think they saw truly? Just their enemies, or perhaps a reflection of their own fragility? Comment below. I'd love to hear whether you think awareness or bravery mattered more up there. The mirror equalized enemies and allies alike. It turned the sky into a hall of reflections where technology met humanity. To the Germans, it was a British invention worth stealing. To the British, it was proof that victory didn't come from superior firepower, but from clarity. The courage to look back and still fly forward. By 1945, Britain's skies no longer trembled under the daily roar of dogfights. The war was tilting toward its end, and many of the young men who had once trusted their lives to a 5-inch mirror were now gray around the edges, quieter, older, changed. The Spitfire itself had evolved through more than 20 marks, each refined for altitude, speed, and endurance. But one detail never changed: that small mirror, still perched above the canopy like an unblinking eye. Over 22,000 Spitfires were built by the end of the war. Each carried that same piece of glass, costing around $18, polished by unseen hands in factories from Birmingham to Glasgow. It became as standard as the throttle or the compass, so ordinary that no one mentioned it anymore. Yet behind its ordinariness lived a silent legacy: hundreds of saved lives, thousands of spared griefs. In 2019, the soldiers of Oxfordshire Museum named a Spitfire rear view mirror 1940 as its object of the month. Its metal bracket is corroded, the glass slightly fogged, but the reflection remains. Visitors lean close and see themselves, distorted and ghostly, just as the pilots once did. Some children laugh, others fall quiet. The curator tells them, "This isn't about flying, it's about looking back." And that truth stretches far beyond aviation. For the men who survived, the mirror followed them home in memory. Many kept small pieces salvaged from wrecks, mounted on wooden frames, or stored in drawers like relics. One veteran, Group Captain Charles Irving, kept his until his death in 1982. On the back, he had scratched 4 words: "Always check behind you." His daughter later said it became family wisdom, not about war, but about life itself. The symbolic weight of that mirror endures because it represents something greater than invention. It stands for awareness, humility, and the refusal to take safety for granted. It reminds us that vigilance is not paranoia, that foresight can be born of fear, and that sometimes the smallest piece of glass can reflect the largest truth. When the last surviving Spitfire pilots gather at commemorations, they still tilt their heads upward instinctively, eyes flicking toward where that mirror once was. Habits born in terror have become gestures of gratitude. The mirror is gone, but the instinct to look back, to remember, remains. And so, the story of a part that cost just $18 becomes something priceless. It reminds us that the victories of history were not won only by courage or firepower, but by clarity, by those who dared to look behind while still flying forward. In every war, greatness is often measured by weapons, heroes, and victories. Yet history's truest miracles hide in subtler places, in the small, inexpensive things that preserved life rather than destroyed it. The Spitfire mirror was one such miracle. It did not shoot, did not roar, did not terrify. It merely revealed what was already there, and by doing so, it changed outcomes. When the world rebuilds itself after conflict, we often forget these humble inventions. But the mirror's lesson endures. Awareness saves more lives than aggression. The pilot who looked back was not fearful. He was wise, and that wisdom transcends the cockpit. It speaks to anyone living through uncertainty, reminding us that progress depends not only on moving forward, but on understanding what lies behind. Today, that same principle lives on in modern aviation, in the heads-up displays of fighter jets, the cameras in passenger planes, and even in the mirrors of cars that whisper objects in mirror are closer than they appear. Every glance backward is a continuation of the same instinct born in 1940, a human refusal to surrender awareness. Perhaps that is the real legacy of the $18 mirror, not a tool of war, but a reflection of humility, vigilance, and the value of life itself.